Yeah, we would like to take a look at issue 552 in redux-toolkit, but to take a look at this, you'll have to understand the history and where this is coming from. So I'll just boot up a little code sandbox. And I'll show you what the real problem here is. Can I do it? No, I cannot do this. And we're gone again. Yeah, that's gonna be a little bit fun. Okay, let me try this once more. Something different if you want to see yourself, and switch back to this code sandbox. Yeah. Probably because the window title changes or something. Yeah. We're going to add Redux toolkit to this. And we're also going to add React Redux to this. And now, if I were in some application and I wanted to use the Redux store, or rather I would want to dispatch something to the Redux store, I'd probably import use dispatch from React Redux, and I'd say const dispatch equals use dispatch. And now in some kind of React.use effect or something, I could try to dispatch an action. This works quite fine, but we need the types for React Redux. Just a second. Yeah, these ones. Yeah, okay. It executes that, and I just really want to look at the type, so I believe I can close this. Yeah, just like that. Okay, not really interested in anything runtime right now. We're purely talking types today. This works fine, and this also returns the expected return type, which in this case is the action itself. So hovering over this means we get something that's type string in an object. But if you were to dispatch a thunk, this right now would not work. So if we have this, thunk, and we would try to execute this here, this should not work. Or rather, it somehow works, but it doesn't return what we expect. This returns a function that returns a promise of a string, but we know that in reality this function will be executed in the thunk middleware, and we will get the promise of a string returned instead of the function that returns that promise of a string. So this dispatch type is wrong. And this is quite normal because this use dispatch knows nothing about thunks. And we sometime have to tell use dispatch, what dispatch type to really expect. If we were using a redux-toolkit with configure store, half of that work is already done. Because if I say now store equals configure store with some reducer I really do not care about, that always returns an empty state, I could say my dispatch here out here is already typed correctly because it has the thunk middleware in it. So if I were to do store.dispatch, create thunk is one line further down. Let's move it up there. This will be a promise of a string. This is what we expect. So this dispatch for now is typed correctly for us. So according to the documentation, what you do is that you extract your dispatch type from our store. So we could say type app dispatch equals type of store.dispatch. And this is a thunk dispatch type now. And we can use that in our use dispatch call here, and returned will have the correct value. So all of this already kind of works. But in the past, we had problems where people were putting on in their own middlewares. So something like use these middlewares and not the default middlewares. And now we see correctly that app dispatch is back to a normal dispatch of any action and is not a thunk dispatch. This wasn't the case in the beginning. In the beginning it was always the thunk dispatch, which was wrong. Right now we have it so that if I add actual middlewares in here, the type is inferred correctly. I show the code that does this inference a little bit later. So right now we could say getDefaultMiddleware for the state of an empty state. And would be an array of arrays right now because getDefaultMiddleware returns more than one middleware. So if we do this, everything's fine and it works again. And also if you have your own manually written middleware, so let's say I have my middleware is let's import that. As a middleware with a dispatch overload, an empty store, and declare const, sorry, my fault. And here we could add our dispatch overload and say whenever we get something that has a property of foo with a value of bar, then this middleware should return bas, something like that. So if we went ahead and would say we dispatch with a store dispatch something like foo bar as const, then as soon as, right now it's an error, as soon as we actually use this middleware, it works, it is accepted, and it returns as we declared bas. So all of this is already in. But here is where users get a lot of problems and a lot of errors, because we are suggesting to do this in in our typings, or rather we do suggest to do as const for it to be a little bit safer in our documentation. But in reality, TypeScript doesn't always work here. So if we were to change the order and moved this spread to the front, this down here gets lost, because the spread type is only really working with TypeScript if it's at the end. Otherwise, the complete type of our middleware array goes down to a read-only middleware of just about any middleware in an array. So we are losing this functionality here because it just returns any action now. We are losing the ability to dispatch a function, and all that because we just moved these around and TypeScript decided, okay, I don't really know what to do with this spread in the front, and I'm just going to fall back to this type being an array of some random middleware, but not an array that actually contains these middlewares. We can see this a little bit better if we move it out. So if we say this, this is an array of middleware without any special dispatch typings. If we have it the other way around, that would be what we actually expect. If we do the as const, I can show you up here it wouldn't change anything. Still this. Down here it's really an tuple, not an array anymore, that contains a middleware with our custom dispatch type, some other middlewares, and the thunk middleware, which we would also have lost otherwise. So doing this is currently not possible. It's not possible to append custom middlewares at the end and still keep the types. I mean, of course, you can now type all of this yourself, like dispatch, thunk dispatch, and yeah, I guess that would be this dispatch type here. Yeah, but this helps nobody. Nobody wants to write that. So we want to find some kind of way to do this without TypeScript losing those types. And spreads out of the question because we can't type spreads anymore. That's a language feature and we have no influence on that. So the only other thing we can do is to look at the methods, array methods we have to work with here. So my initial thought would be, what about writing middleware 3 equals getDefaultMiddleware concat my middleware. And this would be nice if the lib.ts typings were what I was hoping they would be, extending the type of the returned array. But this really removes any information about my middleware here. So if I used this down here, then the thunk would still work, but this doesn't. So what we essentially want to do today is to get this working. So we'll add types for the return value of getDefaultMiddleware that override the typings of concat with typings that allow for this behavior, because as far as I've seen and experimented, this is probably the best we can go. Yeah, the sound of a mechanical keyboard here. I was on the other screen, so I couldn't see the chat. Right now, I'll jump back into Visual Studio Code, which also means I will be able to read the chat again. But this here is the context of what we actually want to do today. So this should just be working right now. Okay. And we are in the code of redux-toolkit. I'll just take a quick tour here. In here we have our configure store method that we were using recently. We also have our getDefaultMiddleware method, and this is where we will do most of the work. Just to go over getDefaultMiddleware. getDefaultMiddleware by default returns the middlewares that we think are useful for you. So for one, as a default, the Thunk middleware, because let's face it, most people nowadays use Thunk as a middleware, and it's very useful for beginners and people that don't have very complex use cases like Saga. But it also does the immutable check middleware and the serializable check middleware. So you could turn these off with calling getDefaultMiddleware manually, but by default we add two more middlewares. One which will check if any modification to the state has occurred in the reducer and warn the user about that. And the other that will check if anything in the actions is not serializable, which would cause potential problems in the dev tools and in combination with other middlewares. And also if anything that's being stored in the Redux store is not serializable because of exactly the same reason. If you put classes in there, that might probably affect time traveling. If you have other non-serializable or especially non-deserializable stuff, that might also impact all that stuff. So by default, this is with Thunk middleware, with immutable check middleware, and with a serializable check middleware, but it can also be configured. So you could call this like my middlewares are getDefaultMiddleware. Give me all the defaults, but without the Thunks. False. And oh yeah, ESLint, thank you. And this would return just a middleware, not a middleware and a Thunk middleware. If we had Thunk true, this actually returns the Thunk middleware and the middleware. So this has some kind of overload. We achieved this by giving it the second general parameter that extends these default middleware options that I'm using up there. So Thunk, immutable check, and serializable check. And it returns a Thunk middleware for those options. So we have this type that also gets these options passed in. And that does a little check. It checks if we have the extra argument set, then we will return a Thunk middleware with the extra argument. And otherwise, it will check if we have no. At first we check if Thunk is false, and then we return nothing because there is no Thunk middleware. And as a fallback from that, we'll check if the extra argument is there, infer it, and return a Thunk middleware that's typed for this extra argument. And otherwise, we just return a normal Thunk middleware. And this here is just for backwards compatibility because we had a little bit wrong typings at some time and we didn't want to break it for some people. And that's why we just added the optional null as extra type. So what we really want this to return, though, is not this array of a middleware and optionally probably configured Thunk middleware, but we wanted to return our array type. So let's call this our array, or interface rather, extends array. And right now this will probably enable us, like this, and this will enable us to override some stuff here. Let's just take a look why this is going. It's prettier is getting me right now. So we could add something extra, which would be append middleware or something. And say m extends some middleware. And now we already see we need the state type. So the state type might be quite nice, or rather, no, at this point we are not interested in the state type. And also not in the dispatch types, so we can just do an any here. And this would return an instance of our array with t or m. So I shouldn't have deleted that. If we say const my middlewares equals getDefaultMiddleware for an empty state, dot append middleware, and now we input some other middleware, so let's declare one. Let's declare this weird middleware, which is a middleware of some dispatch type I'm going to add, and the empty state. And let's say this accepts any string, and it returns a number, because why not? And we would append this weird middleware now. Cannot find name. Didn't execute it. So this is not going to be accepted. Yeah. Of course. Yes. And now what this returns is an instance of our array, and it has the middleware, the thunk middleware, and it also has this last middleware that's getting cut off. So I'm just removing the thunk middleware out. And if we hover over now, we see still a thunk middleware. That should not be the case. Alright. Okay. I just showed this to you and it worked. So I couldn't imagine what I did here to introduce that change, but let's undo it. I'm totally sorry. This is not the generic. This is a function argument. Sometimes it turns out I'm a little bit blind. So yes, now there is no thunk on this, and we can move this up here. And yeah, I have to make our array out of this again. Yeah. And now we see we have this middleware that's being returned by getDefaultMiddleware by default. And we have also our strange middleware, or a weird middleware. Let's make this more readable. this. And when we hover now, yeah, exactly what I was looking for. This is either a middleware or a weird middleware. So appending like this already works. Which means we have to work on this for a bit and completely integrate it. And also I have to say I would like this not to be named append middleware, but really concat, because it's an array, it already has a concat method. We wouldn't even have to write runtime code if we overloaded this. We just would have to type it a little differently. So let's say this extends a read-only array, because then we have to care about much less than we had to before. And let's change this to concat, which will result in an error because this is by no means compatible in any way. So let's make this a little more middleware themed, I guess. At first, let's say this array is a middleware array, and the generic type only accepts middlewares, because that makes quite much sense. And concat here is incompatible, which is totally fine because concat takes a lot more. Usually concat would take an array on the one hand, which would be array of t, and return an array of t. And the other overload would be any number of arguments, which would essentially do the same, or this should be the upstream typings, as these aren't really, apparently. Let's look at this. Okay, yes. So let's take these original typings and try to modify them as much as we can. But without all those comments. So this is already possible. And let's say we have an additional type of middlewares that we want to append to this. And that internal concat array is a little bit weird. Okay, yeah. Yeah, then let's just say we have this extend a concat array of any stuff like that. And this extends an array of a concat array. The upstream typings are a little bit weird. And this would return us another middleware array of our initial type t or our additional type. And this is where we somehow have to get it working. Or rather, we don't really have, because getting this to match 100% to the original type of array is almost impossible. So what we also can do is that we extend read-only array, but we omit the concat type and just write our own. I guess that might be easier. And I'd say this is nicer, yes. And we do the... Wait a sec. Where was this used? Ah, yeah. Those are both overloads of the spread operator. But there should also be a second signature to concat that accepts just an array. So we have to keep that in mind as well. Oh no, that's essentially this. Okay. Yeah, then let's write this a little bit differently. This just extends. Yeah. The fun of streaming TypeScript, I hope this keeps readable, because the problem is TypeScript in these typings is barely readable by itself. And of course, me typing around doesn't make it any more readable. But we can try. Our additional middlewares. This would be one way to do it. And the other concatenation signature I have in mind would be just to add this array here, which also should do something. Once we, yeah. So now with all that, we should be able to use concat here. And we should get a middleware array of our initial middleware and a weird middleware. Alternatively, we should also be able to add an array of a weird middleware. Yes, thank you. Which essentially would do the same, because that's the other signature of concat. Next to concatenation, there would also be the other thing, prepending stuff, because I don't want people to use the spread operator in one way and the .concat method the other way around. So I would add, with almost the same signature, a prepend method. If you have any better naming suggestions, please throw them into the chat, because I really don't. And this doesn't really make a difference, but it makes it a little bit easier to write. I'm also going to rename T to middlewares. This makes it quite extensive, but also readable, I hope. So we have this, we have concat. I need a second middleware. Nah. Okay. And let's say we prepend this. And this should, yeah, prettier. This should say we have our second middleware, the other middlewares, and our weird middleware. So from a types perspective, this is already doing everything. Of course, from a code perspective or a runtime perspective, this doesn't do anything yet. So I guess we'll have to add that next. And we can take this middleware and just make a class out of it. Or rather, can you extend native class? Yeah, I believe you can extend array. So let's try it. Or now, because I would change the signature. Oh, we will try. Just make this a class. Of course, this cannot extend something that omits something. So we will very soon see. Oh, let me stash this before I ruin everything, but I just wrote. Okay. Stashed, and we can try to do this. We extend a normal array now. This signature is not incompatible, it just has no no runtime implementation, so we can say concat and we use the original implementation. And we can also add something here. So we say prepend. We say return okay, and the typecast typecast is not necessary because we have this return type declared outside. So this would be that. Next, I'm going to add some runtime tests. After that, we are going to add some type tests, and then we are going to look at the integration with configure store itself, because that might not take a middleware array right now. I'm not 100% sure about that. So these are the tests for getDefaultMiddleware. I would say we add another section to this. Describe middleware array functionality. Yeah. Allows to prepend a single value. Allows to prepend multiple values in spread, or in the rest. No, spread and rest are the same. Array is first argument, yes. And the same 3 tests with appending, concatenation. So let's create some stuff for this. Middleware 1 equals some middleware, which is this, or API to next to action to API dispatch action. No. Okay, I'm dumb. To next action, and API won't be used. We'll add a second middleware, and we will also add some tests that all of this stuff is non-mutating. So how would we do that? Let's just start with this and we go on from there. So this would be prepended equals default middleware prepend middleware 1, and we would expect prepended to equal an array with middleware 1 and everything that was in default middleware. We will only test this. And we will start our tests. Oh, wrong folder. Sure. Startup time is always a bit long. And we have a failed test. Oh yeah, it's a test to do and I've added an implementation. That's a no-no. So let's rerun it. Okay, default middleware.prepend is not a function. If anyone paid better attention than me, that is to be expected because right now we are not using this class anywhere. We only defined that something like that would be returned. This should do now. And we are passing. Yep. So the other thing to check is that nothing changed. So we are going to keep a copy of the original default middleware. And we say expect default middleware to be to equal original default middleware, and value is prepended. Default middleware is not changed. And also we are going to test, but that would be obvious then. Prepended is a new object, or a new array rather. Not to equal default middleware where we started off. Now we can go ahead and take these tests and repeat them down here. How much did I copy? I didn't copy enough. So we are going to pass an array as the first argument. And we are expecting this to be middleware 1, middleware 2. And also we want to be able to do this with a spread operator, so without the argument, and that should be possible too. And we have some error. Yeah. And I'm not too sure about that. Is this expected behavior of concat? Am I just remembering that wrong? So let's test this once more. If I open a new tab, you will still follow my cursor. Okay. So we can look into the official documentation of array prototype concat. In English, please. Used to merge two or more arrays. This should be able to concatenate arrays from what I've gathered. Yeah, concat arrays, and our misbehavior was in the rest notation. And I failed, didn't I? Yeah. Let's take a look back at the code. Hi, Farbanza. That's a good question. I was up here. Because I'm doing arr concat this, and that doesn't work out that way. So if yeah, we need some more logic here. So if arr.length equals 1 and the first element in here is an array, okay, for Banzer in short, we have problems with our typings if you want to concatenate middlewares for the usage in configure store. Right now, we recommend people using the spread operator for that. And using the spread operator can, in some situations, get rid of all type information that's in there. So you don't end up with an array of specifically typed middlewares. But you end up with an array that just has any middleware, and that results in the dispatch type of that's returned by configure store being wrong. So instead of getting back to the spread operator, my idea was to add a concat and a prepend method that's correctly typed to the return value of getDefaultMiddleware, which would allow you to write something like, if I still have it here, no, but of course I have it here, something like defaultMiddleware.prepend another middleware or something, and get something back that is strongly typed, correctly typed, and will in the end get you the correct dispatch type. If you want to look a little more while I'm typing into what I'm saying, I have it in the top right of the screen. This is a redux-toolkit issue 552. So getting back to that, I was creating a class that extends the original array class, and I just need to add types for concat, because concat is fine. Concat is already implemented by JavaScript, but prepend isn't. So we have to write that ourselves using concat in the end. So if we only have one argument, and that one argument is an array, we don't want the rest argument here to be concatenated with this, but we want the first element in this argument to be concatenated with this. And that should do it, I hope. Yep, it does. So if we have this functionality, I'm pretty sure we won't get any problems the other way around, because this was the more manual or complex one. But I'll add these type tests anyway. So let's say we have concatenated concat, the middleware one, and we expect this to be that the other way around. Yes, thank you. So we have in this test an array as first argument. And that should behave like this. And then you want the body of this test to be duplicated down here. And we want to use object spread in here. Everything else should be the same. And we have a fail. It's a test to do still. This as well. Save all this. And we are green so far. Now we have that one case left where we want to check that everything returned by concat is still the same type that can again be concatenated, and the other way around, everything that's returned by prepend is still of the same time and can be prepended again. And always, I think we should add one test that combines both. So one doing a prepend followed by append, one append followed by prepend, just to be extra clear here. I'm not going to test all other notations for that though. And if we test that both directions work, we already have tested the return value. Allows to concat and then prepend. Yeah. So we would expect something like this. And we don't need these tests because that has been tested without end up there. So and we want to test prepend and then concat. Just the other way around. Should still give the same result. And then let's say we export this middleware array class so that we can just do an instance of test here Yeah, let's test this up there. This fits in quite nicely. So we expect a prepended instance of middleware array to be truthy. And let's import this middleware array from getDefaultMiddleware. Is there some test that can do instance of that reads better than this? I'm not really sure. And you aren't seeing my browser. And you won't be able to see because I mucked that up again. Expect instance of. I'm Googling that just now because that would make for a nicer test. Okay, there seems to be a to be instance of. And it fails. Yeah. That's TypeScript for you. I guess the chest instance of expects something that's a little different. The weird thing is right now it was working like this, so I think that's a discrepancy between TypeScript and... No, it doesn't. Because it isn't. And we really missed a bug here. Because this might be okay, but it really isn't. We have to do new middleware array of the return value of this. And I'm not really sure about the array constructor here. Doesn't the array constructor take in an array and work out of that? Or do we really have to spread here? We have to spread, okay. Well, that's not too nice, but it doesn't really hurt either. And we have to do it here and there as well. Yeah, that makes the test green. Good that I added that test. I would have missed that. And I guess the instance of should actually be working right now. Yeah. I'd say we test this up here. We add the same test to all the other invocations. I'll have to go through there and change all the comments for the second half. From prepended to concatenated, yes. So here and here, here. Yeah. Okay, run these again. So we have runtime tests. Seems to be working. The next thing to do is either to test this in combination with a configure store, or to test this in the type tests, because we also have type tests in this project and these are quite important. I think, as I'm already in this file and we already have tests in here that are calling over to configure store, we can do that as well. Or rather, no, that's just a type testing thing. That has no runtime implications that have to be tested explicitly with a configure store. So let's not do that. Then I guess we are in type test territory. These are in a separate folder over here, and the type tests are a little bit of a pain at the moment because you can't run separate type tests, but all the type tests in this project have to run in one single run, so I can't just say skip this or skip that, and that adds up, and running those tests is just about a minute, I'd say. Let's run the other tests here right now and stash this for now, so I don't lose anything by accidentally doing some weird stuff. So if I were to run the type tests, we have one entry point for these here that just checks the whole directory. And these are quite a few. And that does add up. On the other hand, let's just cheat this because I'm really not keen on running these over and over and over again. Let's try this. That might be working. I haven't been on this machine. I haven't installed the dependencies for quite some while. So let's do that. And while that takes a while, or rather, let's speed this up a little bit. Check files, and let's just check the configure store.type test.ts. No, please don't do this right now. yarn install should be through. But I rerun it. I just don't want it to run all those scripts because that will take forever now. Ah, yeah. That's better. And now running the types should only test this one file. And these are actually already out. I have an open pull request right now that has not been merged because, and that's the reason I'm not working on it, that already has this all removed. So I'll just comment that out. That will make things even a little more fast. So let's see how long it takes. Okay. Well, let's do it like that. Cheating a little never hurt anyone. Okay, that means I only have to wait about 16 minutes and not forever. But it also did the configure store tests, yeah, and these might right now not be correct. Don't we have any getDefaultMiddleware tests right now? That's weird. Yeah, those are all in configure store type tests, and as expected, those are failing after my changes. So let's take a look at them. Yeah. Yes, Lint, please. Ignore this for the whole file because those tests have to look like this. And then let's see where our error was. Yeah, line 171. As you can see, there's a lot red in these tests, but that's to be expected because we really have tests of things that we want to throw errors, and we prepend those with typings expect error. If we would be using only TypeScript 3.9, we could also do TS expect error. But as we are running these type tests in every version from TypeScript 3.5 to 3.9, that wouldn't work in older versions. So we have to do an external testing framework for this. So it looks not really nice in the editor, but we have to live with that. Line 171. In the configure store types themselves, not in the type test. Yeah. The weird thing is, I was expecting just about any error, but I have no idea why we are getting this right now. So the question is, Is it this way around? No, it just doesn't like to be passed into create store like this. Is this any type of external upstream change? Let me stash everything. And restart my TypeScript server here. This is really weird. Yep. That might be my fault though, because I was doing a yarn install and not an npm install, and we only have an official npm package log. So this might be some upstream change, but that's something I'll investigate later. It still ignores scripts even with npm install, isn't it? I can't help but wonder why exactly this was happening right now. But yeah, if I get sidetracked by that right now, nobody, including me, will understand anything I'm doing. So we probably shouldn't. Okay, stuff is installed. And we don't have a type error here. Okay, that much for that. And let's pop our stash and continue with something completely different that is not having any error here. Nice. We were in the type tests. And right now those tests are passing, and we are still running in 20 seconds instead of 70, which is nice. If we take a look in here, I really cannot base this off the current master, because I have modified all these tests in this other pull request. So let me just check which branch that was. Hope it won't change too much and change over to that branch. That was 549 with the middleware builder. This is on my personal Git repository, and to access that I need to enter my YubiKey. Just a second. And we are on 552, and we are popping our stash. And there we have our first merge conflict in getDefaultMiddleware, which somehow was to be expected. But I'm not really sure how this would be a conflict, because it was just added code in both instances. Accept both changes. Thank you. Any other merge conflicts? No. So as you will see here, the type tests for version 3.4 have already been removed. I don't have to care too much about those. And we are back in here. Let's rerun our type tests that have changed while looking at them. And right here at the end, we have some extra tests. Yeah, with this behavior here. So this is the behavior that is working. If we had these the other way around, this test would spectacularly fail. And this is what we are trying to do. So let's add our new test directly below that. This means we are using prepend now. We are prepending that with the other middleware. I think it's a little more readable like that. Yeah. Modifiers cannot appear here. Do we have some kind of any in this file? No, I haven't yet. We were adding stuff here, and let's see if there's any, and thus it has been initialized, and we can prepend that. And as well, this behavior is preserved now as this behavior, which is exactly what we want to do. Also, if we move this out here, we can add another test. So we can say expect type. I don't have an expect type function in here yet. We really need to up our testing game. Expect type t as a function that takes t and returns t. Yep. And what am I expecting? I am expecting this to be some kind of read-only array, or read-only array that contains the type of concatenated, as well as the types of not concatenated. as well as some thunk middleware type. And this was type other middleware, or it will be very circular. Okay, so this seems to work, but just to give it a test, let's test this with the other middleware, and this gives an error. So yes, our test is actually working. Very important to test that. Always let the tests fail. Or a middleware with an empty dispatch type, actually. Yep. The same thing the other way around. Instead of using prepend, we are using concat. For the types, the order doesn't really play any role. So, yep, that's it, and that works as well. Now we should add some more tests that explicitly test the return type of getDefaultMiddleware, or some tests that actually explicitly test the behavior of middleware array. And as this file is already getting too big as it is, I'm going to create a new file. Let's get those over. As I already said when announcing this, after we are done with this, we are going to look into different type testing frameworks and going to look if there's something better than what we are actually using. And I'm actually pretty sure that there's something better, but right now this is how we write our type tests. So import getDefaultMiddleware from source getDefaultMiddleware. This. Okay, reorder to the top. ESLint is quite right on this. Now we can take a look at our runtime tests that we already added and see which of those we want to recreate here. So essentially we want to test prepending single values and multiple values in different combinations, yes. And also it would be nice to somehow test that it doesn't slip out, so we have to test the resulting dispatch value if it's still callable in the ways we are expecting it to. So let's start with one first test. I don't need any correct values in here. This is a middleware that takes a string and returns a number, as we already had. And then there's a second middleware that takes a number and returns a string, because why not? So if we say default middleware, prepend with our middleware 1, we expect the type of the return from the dispatch. Okay, this is going to be interesting. We need some function to get the dispatch type out of our middlewares. So I'll say function get dispatch for something that extends an array of middleware. And this function actually returns dispatch for middlewares and next line, please. Thank you. Okay. Tab tests, never getting called, never having runtime errors. So, if we would say we get the dispatch for concatenated and dispatch it with foo, then we could say expect type number for this. And that works. And just to make sure, whoa, editor too fast. This should be an error. So we say typings expect error. Also, I have to change our test, that it now tests the middleware array type test. In addition to that, we have to test that the original middleware type is still preserved. So we have to test if it still has the thunk signature. So expect, let's say, no need to write this 1,000 times. I'd rather declare this. Okay, I cannot declare a function like that. Oh, this is why. Yeah, I'm blind. Just have to close this here, yeah. And I do the same for expect type up here. This makes more sense in the long run. Expect that I have to write it like this. So, what I really wanted to do was declare some thunk. And this thunk in this case would just return a promise, because most thunks return promises of the string thunk, because why not? And we can say type thunk return equals promise thunk, and write it like this. That's more like it. So we can say expect type thunk return for dispatch thunk creator. This should work as well. And that's important. Okay. Concatenating or prepending with two middlewares should also enable us now to... This doesn't work here, but it should work here. Expected one type increment, but got two. I think my TS server is running behind right now. Anyone on the back seat sees where I'm going wrong right now? I mean, this line isn't really different from any of the lines before. There's a comma that would be expected in line 33. But why would he expect a comma there? Let's undo this for a bit. I can recreate this quite fast. And didn't close this brace. That was it. Okay. Yeah. Now if we add the middleware too, we should also get a string if we pass in a number. Yep, and that down there still gives an error, which is important to test. We prepend a single element. We prepend multiple with rest notation. We prepend multiple with array notation next. By doing it like this. And hopefully this works too. Doesn't look like it right now, which is unfortunate. No, that's not good. That's back to the drawing board. So but middleware 2 was typed the other way around. Yeah, it was. So doing just this would work. I have to write as const here because TypeScript otherwise would throw away the types. And that makes this a read-only array, which we haven't typed for. So we have to get back into our source code. And that's why I write all those types, because nobody would ever encounter this during a beta test. But sooner rather than later, they will somehow encounter this. So these should always be read-only arrays, which are compatible in any way with normal arrays in an input position, but you can write as const when inputting them. So where is this test? Here is this test. Okay. And now that works. Wonderful. Really happy we found that. So we have prepending single, we have prepending multiple. I'll just duplicate this for concat. And I can do a search and replace here. So definitely do that. I've just looped around, didn't I? I just did. Okay. Concat, concat, concat. 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 And here I stop. I fail. Concat, 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 yes. Then we have this last case of concat and prepend. That should work as well. So I would say everything is working here. This would probably leave the last problem of passing this into configure store, but no, that also already works because configure store middleware should already be typed as M, where M is extending middlewares and middlewares extends read-only array. So this read-only array would also accept our new array type. But it might actually be a little at a conflict with the other pull request. The other pull request added a new notation to middleware. So you could not only call configure store like you could before with an array of middlewares in there, but also by calling it with a function. Just looking for the test for that. Yeah, middleware builder notation. So you could call middleware and put an object in here, or rather a function, and that function would pass you in a correctly typed getDefaultMiddleware, because before that you'd have to write getDefaultMiddleware for my root state, whereas many people just derive the root state from the complete return, so you have a circular type dependency, which this would have solved. But this callback that we can put here into middleware is a callback that will get as a current getDefaultMiddleware. Current getDefaultMiddleware will return an array, and not as we are now doing a middleware array. So we have to change this. That should not cause any additional problems. And it doesn't. But we probably should also add a test for that or two. Just like we have this here. I'd say we duplicate this test. And we take this other middleware. And instead of all this, we can do getDefaultMiddleware concat other middleware. And something's red. Was just the indentation. And the tests are running for the wrong file right now. This. No, the type test we were in was down here. Yeah. And why be shy? We can also concatenate and prepend in the same test, because all the single tests have been done like 1,000 times. Yeah, result 3, because why keep some sense or order? So dispatching B should return this is a large B. And all the types are getting preserved. This is quite nice. So after having added all this, I believe we are pretty much done with this. So I'll revert this back to what it was originally. I'll run all tests. Which probably will take quite some time. Yeah. How many people are watching this anyways? Okay. Not too many, but hey, first stream ever. That's quite nice. So. Okay, we're getting back the first passes of our tests. But the tab test was still correct. It takes some time. After we have done this, I'm going to run a yarn build, because after all this has been built, we get an artifact out of it, which is, let's take a look here, I'll show you. Which is this API report. This contains all the types we export from our package in the current form. So we can directly see in the pull request, by looking at the diff in this report, which external types changed by this pull request. And this is quite important because, as you can imagine, any little change in the public types might have quite the impact, especially if you change something to something more restrictive. So you have to be very careful with that. So now I'm going to generate that report. Then we can take a look at the diff, but I guess everything is as far as I'm expecting differently, of course, because we added this new class. Even though that is not going to be exported for manual use, but it's just a typed implementation detail. Yeah, I should probably remove those from the code. I should review my diff in general after I've done this. Because there might be still some additional stuff. So here we changed this. This is a new class. This is a returned middleware array. We wrap it in our middleware array here. Push is just modifying, not returning a copy. And shift the same. We can add that. We can later remove that as well. Don't need this change. This here are just the tests that we added. And these are all the other tests we added. So this is our diff in the signature. And as you see, all that really changed here is that we are returning a middleware array instead. I'm not too happy with this RP report because it hides some of the internals away that still might be interesting, but we are a little bit of abusing it as well, so that's okay. So yeah, I'm going to commit this, and after I've committed that, I'll open a pull request. And yeah, I've been streaming for 2 hours now, and I like this, but this is quite exhausting, so I'm sorry, but I will make a cut there and do most of the rest on my own for today. But this was quite fun as well, so I think I'll do this again. I'll just put it on Twitter, so follow me there. And yeah, I hope you learned something. Have a great day.